All right, we'll go ahead and call the second meeting of the Disaster Prevention and Resiliency Task Force meeting to order, and ask everyone to please silence their cell phones at this time, and I'll have to remind myself to do that. And also, we'll ask the Secretary, Mr. Secretary, to please call the roll.
Senator Herron, Senator Howell, Senator Maiden, Senator Reed, Representative Blanton, Representative Hart, Representative Tackett Lafferty,
Here.
Representative Whitaker, Co-Chair Webb, Co-Chair Freeland.
Present. All right, thank you. And we do have a quorum and duly constituted to do business, and we need a motion and a second to adopt the minutes from the last meeting. All right, then call a voice vote, so we do have that, and if past minutes are adopted, so we'll go to the agenda items, and we'll go ahead and ask our first presenters to come to the table. And from Western Kentucky University Disaster Science Operations Centers, we'll go ahead and have our speakers come to the table and ask them to have a seat and introduce themselves, and we'll give them a second to get situated. And introduce yourselves for the record, and go ahead and get started.
Dr. Josh Durkee, Professor of Meteorology at Western Kentucky University.
And make sure that green mic is on. I'm sorry.
Oh, I see. Dr. Josh Durkee, Professor of Meteorology at Western Kentucky University.
Harmony Gershio, first-year graduate student at Western Kentucky University.
And I'm Jennifer Smith, Assistant Vice President of Government and External Relations. Thank you, Co-Chair Freeland, for allowing us to be here today.
All right, please proceed.
Okay. Today we'd like to discuss a little bit about our program. I serve as a university meteorologist at Western Kentucky University, Vice Chair of the Department of Earth, Environmental, and Atmospheric Science, and Director of our Emergency Management Disaster Science programs and the Disaster Science Operations Center. And today, we want to address the question of what can we do as a state to be better prepared for disasters, and we want to really just discuss how WKU can help fit that role to lead that front. So at WKU, we're really spearheading curriculum and operations on this idea of disaster sciences. Disaster sciences is a multidisciplinary suite of programs with industry partnerships, leveraging existing infrastructure and research operations. If we zoom in on this flowchart, the foundation for disaster science is underneath the newly appointed Consortium of Disaster Science and Management, which is sort of the governing body across the university that helps formalize some of the programs. And so the key program is meteorology, which was instituted in 2008. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And the Emergency Management Disaster Science certificate programs at the graduate and undergraduate level, and the Graduate Homeland Security Science and Geographic Information Systems. And then we have companion programs across the university: public health, military science, sports, and some other groups. And some key industry partners that we work with. So we work with folks in the bourbon industry in Kentucky. We do all the Division I athletic events, some of the world major marathon events, some festivals, and some other things. And on the horizon is, under the charge of the consortium, is the development of new programs in disaster sciences. So dedicated bachelor's, master's, and doctoral programs specifically aiming at the PhD level. So the consortium really came together because of this top bullet here. 7 of the top 12 counties in the U.S. with federal disaster declarations exist in this state. But there are, at the time, limited opportunities for students to train and get the educational experiences to work in the contemporary environment for emergency management and disaster science. And so that's where WKU fits in. So the meteorology program, like I said, started in 2008. I was hired to help start that program. We had just a handful of majors to kick off that program, and now we have currently 115 students enrolled in the fall. the largest program in our department. And it satisfies the GS 1340 federal requirement to be a federal meteorologist with NOAA and the National Weather Service. So we place a lot of students in that sector, along with other sectors as well. So we have students in this state at the National Weather Service across the state who are serving our community with the National Weather Service. And our mantra at WKU is to learn by doing, applied learning. So when we talk about teaching students how to forecast severe weather, I take them out into the field, and we have to, put them in the face of severe weather. They have to forecast this. They have to handle the logistics and document the forecast outcomes. And so we travel many miles across the country to learn from this experience. And on the next slide, we can see that it's been very fruitful. So these are all pictures from that the students have documented over the years. So when we're talking about severe weather and severe weather forecasting, it is our program and our students that are at the top of the food chain because they are in the face of doing those types of activities. In 2019, our president came along. President Caboni is really his mantra at the university is applied learning, applied research, and he wanted to see it firsthand. And so he joined us along. In the bottom left is a picture of a tornado, and that's a picture he was able to take so that he could see, how this all comes together. And so in this scene, we're doing forecast discussions. He's riding along, learning about the radar, sitting in on student-led forecast discussions, and just a really, really wonderful experience. This picture just shows where we've been. So over the years, this is 120,000 miles worth of driving, and this is where students have documented severe weather across the country. And so we bring these skills back to Kentucky, and this is what we provide as a service learning model for WKU and the community. And this is ultimately reached out to industry, not only in Kentucky, but across the country as well. So we do this with three key initiatives at the university. So we have the Kentucky State Climate Center, which is directed by the state climatologist and the assistant state climatologist. We have the Kentucky Mesonet, and the way those two work is that the state climatologist is the director of each of those entities. The Mesonet technically is a project under the Climate Office, and the Mesonet essentially is there as a data collection network. So they have statewide, county level weather stations that are providing a higher resolution look at weather events across our state. And the Climate Center is there to manage the data and curate that data for analysis and for personal needs as needed. The Disaster Science Operations Center comes in as the operational component. So operational meteorology, operational emergency management is where the forecasting and the monitoring kind of comes in. So DSOC is essentially the nexus for disaster preparedness at WKU. With this vision that it can serve as a hub at the state level. So we provide forecasting, emergency planning, crisis management, decision support for various agencies and venues across the country, along with professional training under the direction of the university meteorologist, which is myself, and the university emergency manager. Both of us are also certified FEMA instructors as well. All right, so a little bit more about the center. The center was instituted in 2021 in the face of the tornadoes. We were actually building the center when the tornadoes went through Bowling Green and Mayfield on that evening. In the next slide, let's see. So the infrastructure is a typical operations center. So this is our operations and intelligence area. Next slide, I think, shows something similar. Recognized by at the state level by the Kentucky Association of Mitigation Managers as the state project of the year in 2022. And then next door, we have our research studio where we do our research to operational development and public outreach with video and podcasts and other elements. And then we have our forecast briefing space and our training classroom. So this is where we can conduct specialized training, scenarios, tabletops, exercises for various groups as needed. And then just a quick look at some of the spaces that we provide. I think on the next slide, you can see we also have weather stations. So again, the Mesonet operates county level weather stations across the state. And then at a higher resolution, we have weather stations that are designed for more of a local need. So we can place these in specific spots. So in this case, they're at all the WKU campuses. We have them quite literally inside of our football stadium to monitor football conditions for heat stress for patrons and the players. Next slide, I think, shows, this is our mobile forecast lab. So we can take DSOC on the road and open this up with full internet and monitoring capabilities. So if we're actually interested in what's happening directly on this site, we can do so. And this is just a quick look at where some of these stations are positioned around the state and elsewhere. This is what the weather stations look like at some of the bourbon sites, Jim Beam and Maker's Mark. And then the next slide shows one of the partnered stations at the Cruzan Distillery down in St. Croix. And then our dedicated forecast space as a part of DSOC as well. So all outfitted with state-of-the-art computing, technology, everything to complete the tasks that we need to do. And then these are just some examples of what our students are doing. This is, again, right after the tornadoes in 2021, we worked directly with the National Weather Service to help survey. So when you hear about it being an EF3, EF2 tornado and that forensic analysis that goes into those determinations, our students are there helping to make those determinations, but learning about that process. And then we've had a bomb threat on campus. And so we have a student on the left here helping to work on the scene while students in DSOC are managing social media and weather conditions on that day. And then just, again, all hazards. So it's not just weather, but weather affects everything. And it's sort of the major spoke on our wheel for natural hazards that can make other incidents more complicated. We've been at the other professional sporting events. I just got back from a FIFA match at the new Geodis Stadium in Nashville. This is a NASCAR event with a student working alongside doing forecasting, which looks pretty simple. Sky looks pretty clear, but NASCAR has some of the trickiest weather conditions for thresholds. If it drizzles, they have to shut the whole thing down. So for them, that's what severe weather looks like. It doesn't always have to be a tornado. And the Special Olympics USA Games at Disney World, we took, I think, like 20 students down to work that event for a couple weeks. And on the next slide, you can see some of the students in action. So on the right, one of our grad students at the time was leading the forecast discussion in real time for weather that was shutting down the event. So we have all the major players in the operations center under his command. Meanwhile, I'm working with one of the FEMA directors on site who was volunteering his time. And then I think next slide just shows something more of the same. So this is one of our pinnacle events. And then for the Chicago Marathon, we actually go up, we do all the forecast analytics, the monitoring and research operations development for that group. And we bring 10 students up each year to work the event to collect weather data, help with the forecasting. I think Harmony can speak on that here in just a second. But one of the top marathons in the world, and they invite WKU and the DSOC group to come up and help manage that on the weather side. And again, just more scenes from Chicago. And then lastly, we are working on a $20 million 5-year research effort through the National Science Foundation, which is headed out by UK, but under the 12 projects, projects 1 and 7, which are the weather hazards and disaster preparedness projects, those are all led by us at WKU. So the purpose of that project is to essentially get a high-resolution historical look at the disasters in this state and compare that to our plans for the state to see if we're on track. What do we really know about the disaster history in our state from a data-driven perspective, and what can we use from that to improve mitigation efforts and perhaps new technology to get us in a better path forward on disaster preparedness? We all know we can't, prevent the events from happening, but a disaster is defined by its population and its communities and the effects of the weather hazards on those communities. And so we have to work with understanding how we're going to work with those communities to better prepare for these types of events. So, and then our students' success speaks for itself. The students are conducting professional research. They're providing professional forecasting and working with major industries, and they're being placed in the federal government, the National Weather Service, the Storm Prediction Center that you might have heard of, and other groups, emergency management offices, private sector forecasting and consulting, law enforcement and fire, military science, again, a big one, state government, academics and research, so everything across the board. And then just a slew of awards and recognition at the state and national level for some of the things that we are doing. So we feel pretty proud by some of those pieces. So, and as it stands then, where's this going? And is there anything like it? So when we think about tornadoes and severe weather, we think about Oklahoma typically. They have the National Weather Center, which is a building that houses the Storm Prediction Center, it houses the National Weather Service, but it also houses the meteorology program and other entities in Oklahoma. And we think about floods and we think about snow, then up in New York, again, similar to Oklahoma, they also have a mesonet and research groups and operations centers, and they just launched the State Weather Risk Communications Center. This made national news as an entity that's very similar to DSOC in the way that it's tying together weather observations, data management, and forecasting and such. And we really see that with Kentucky being in the middle, we get all of those things. We have tornadoes, we have snow, we have floods, and droughts and everything. And we really see the Mid-South, as we saw in one of the earlier slides with all the disaster declarations, WKU really is the hub for disaster management and preparedness. And we see us moving into a model very similar to what we're seeing in Oklahoma and New York. So that's pretty much a summary of what we do. Harmony, do you want to speak on just some of your experiences?
Yeah, so over the last 4 years at Western Kentucky University, I've got to go to Chicago twice. I went on Storm Chase twice, and I've learned more over those 2 weeks on Storm Chase than I did in the last 2 years. It's the hands-on and real-life experiences that have really helped me learn more for forecasting and emergency management. And so I'm excited that this year in Chicago, I'll get to work alongside Dr. Durkee with being a support meteorologist.
Okay, so I probably cannot answer your questions, but they would love to answer questions if the group has any.
All right, we've got some members with questions.
Yes.
Senator Madden.
I'd be interested to know those 7 counties that you said are in the top 12 in Kentucky, if you know them right off.
I don't know them right off the top of my head, but they're across the state. A lot of them are in eastern Kentucky with the flooding disasters.
Yeah.
And
Eric probably would. He's sitting back there shaking his head. So
yeah, I've got to actually have that document behind
that
me
leads
back
into my
there.
second question. You talked a lot about tornadoes, and we recently did have one in eastern Kentucky, and I know that's about every year in western Kentucky. But I would think, and again, Eric's back there, but I would think flooding it would be probably more that Eric deals with and we deal with in Kentucky. You said a little bit about flooding, but do you track that too? And
Absolutely.
Okay. And do you work with Eric?
We haven't yet, but hopefully.
One final question: are y'all the only college in the state that is offering that degree in that disaster?
Yes, I believe at EKU they do have a focus on emergency management. It might be more on policy. Ours is more science driven. And so, and we're bringing in, so what sets us apart, I suppose, is we're the only meteorology program that's bringing it together with emergency management. So in the way that we're doing it, for sure, and what we're offering, we're one of, in fact, we just went through an external review, and we're among the only groups in the country that are providing this type of education.
And my final comment, I'd love to go on one of those, chase that. I'm sure it's
Hey,
exhilarating.
every year,
I love Twister, the movie, so.
every year we bring a smaller satellite group, I call them, that don't have to go for the whole 2 weeks that we go, because it's tough. But when the president and some other groups have come out to join us to get the experience, it's a 3 to 4 day trip just to get a little bit of a taste of what we go through. So yeah, you'd be more than welcome to join us.
All right. Thank you. Co-Chair Webb?
Harmony, if Senator Madden goes on one of those trips, get plenty of good video for us. I'm just excited to hear what y'all have going on down there. I mean, I've been here so long and doing budget work for years where nobody knew what the mezzanette was except me, yay. And we always tried to keep that funded, and now it's really become one of the greatest tools that we have, along with some other enhancements that we hope to get done. But I just have a couple questions on on the data timeline. What do we anticipate in as far as getting some data for this group, and whatever our recommendations are to come from that? What would be the timeline on that collection data?
A lot of the data coming from our research on the 5-year project is coming together in its first stage right now as we speak. The first year, now that we've completed that, our benchmark was to get some of those data sets constructed on the primary level for analysis. I just met with my research group a few days ago, and that database is collected. So as it stands, a statewide disaster database is in our lab, and we're now working through the analytical side of that.
Are you working with our state agency or any other entity?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Yes.
What about the UK project, the $20 million?
Yes.
What all does that entail, and what can we expect from that in the final goal?
Yeah, so that was part of the data I was just mentioning as part of that project. There are many elements to that. There's environmental aspects and just, it's a very diverse research project. But as far as the weather and the disaster science side, the aim is to ultimately come through with an improved and a new understanding of what the weather hazards look like at the state level, where they're occurring. And like I said, we're seeing more tornadoes in the east. We're seeing more tornadoes just in the state overall. The flooding tends to be looking worse. But do our plans match that? And that's what one of our primary questions are, because we're finding that in some cases perception isn't always aligning. Folks in certain parts of the state might think that a certain weather condition is their primary risk when the data show it could be something else. Or on the other side, it could be that, a group might be thinking that they're unsure of what their situation is, and we can reassure them that it still is flooding or tornadoes or whatever the risk might be. Really, this 5-year project is meant to answer a lot of those questions, but also end with a lot more. And it's not meant to just be a one and done 5-year project. It's meant to really expand the research.
And it will enhance our ability to be more resilient and mitigation.
That is the ultimate goal of the project, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And one more if I may. Does Tennessee, you're all pretty close to Tennessee, do they have anything comparable, or do they utilize any information you have?
They just announced a mezzanette project. So I anticipate, similar to Kentucky, that they will start instituting weather stations across the state. And then, of course, the Mid-South would have a Mid-South level mezzanette. As far as curriculum and education, there's nothing like that. In fact, I think that's part of the reason why Harmony ended up with us coming from Knoxville, because there's nothing in Tennessee that does what we do.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. And the EKU program, I think, is in public administration with a concentration. the best I understand.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Yep.
All right, thank you, Co-Chair Webb. Any other questions? Okay, I just had a quick question for Harmony, and just kind of what was your motivation for getting in this program? And
Yeah. I chose WKU for all the experiences, like he said. No school in Tennessee offers meteorology, and out of all the other surrounding schools, I thought that WKU had the best opportunities. And going there, seeing everybody get these great jobs with the National Weather Service and all these other things, I wanted to go there, and it turned out I made the right decision.
was it pretty fun going on a storm chase, though?
Yes, very fun.
All right. Was it anything like the movies?
Kind of.
A little bit. All
Less
right.
dramatic.
We're a little more boring.
Yeah. All right. And one question for Dr. Durkee.
Sure.
We keep hearing about the tornado alley shifting east.
Sure.
A, is that a scientific fact, and B, why is it, if that is in fact true?
There are many perspectives on the way to look at that. And so in the things that we do, it's always important that we don't just look at things the one way. So we can look at it from tornado observations. That's the obvious thing. So when we look at that, we can see that the observations tend to be shifting east. They tend to be shifting east also more at night. So it's a shifting east and nocturnal kind of threat, which increases the danger for these types of events. But we can also look at it from like a satellite perspective. So a new study came out and looked at just changes in vegetation from severe weather, and you're seeing more tornado damages east of where they typically occurred just years ago. So even from a vegetation perspective, we can see that the just damages alone, the shifts in the tornado frequency is moving this way. So the evidence is definitely leaning toward a shift more toward the Mid-South into Kentucky, and like I said, it's tending to do so more so at night, and that's a new part of the problem we have to address with our project, because how do we get that information to people at night? How do we get that information to people in vulnerable communities at night? So it's a cascading challenge that's emerging onto our state.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate the presentation. Very interesting. Any other questions before we? All right. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. We'll have our next presenters coming up, and from Mayfield, it's the Mayfield Graves County Long-Term Recovery Group, and we'll have Amy Chacon, the Executive Director from the Mayfield Graves County Long-Term Group. We'll let you get comfortable, and whenever you are ready, you can begin. Make sure your green light is bright and green.
There we go. My name is Amy Chacon, and I am the current executive director of the Mayfield Graves County Long-Term Recovery Group, which stood up after the 2021 tornadoes that hit our state. My goal today is to hopefully give you guys a firsthand perspective of what it takes at the county level to lead long-term recovery efforts. But before we get into that, I just wanted to highlight a couple facts, which I think piggyback right off of the previous conversation of why are we here, right? Kentucky ranks in the top 10 of federally declared disasters nationally since 2011. Over $500 million of FEMA funds have come into our state since that time, so there's obviously a need. When we look at it from tornadoes, this is again just a small snapshot of data, but in 2023, we were 14th in the nation. 2024, we were 11th in the nation. And then to date this year, we're 8th in the nation for the frequency of tornadoes. So whether that's just a trend that's happening right now, or if this is a long-term trend, I'm not an expert on that, but I thought that statistic was important to bring up. We obviously also deal with a lot of flooding. A statistic I learned recently at National VOAD is Kentucky is only second in the nation to Alaska for the most miles of navigable waterways, which makes sense because we have a lot of flooding. When we look historically at federally declared disasters since 1953, 40 out of the 67 federally declared disasters our state has had have been floods. Which is not new news to those of us, especially those in the East and some of us in the West that have been dealing with flooding in recent years. And then West Kentucky sits on the New Madrid Fault. And that's always the talk of West Kentucky is this the year, right? Or is next year the year? There's predictions that come out all of the time, and we'll never know, but it's important for us to keep that in mind and make sure we're ready, especially in West Kentucky, since we are landlocked on 3 sides by water. And so something that at the emergency management level they're considering is how do we get supplies from Lexington, Louisville, some of these areas where those supplies are pre-positioned to our western counties if those bridges fail during a massive earthquake. The other frame of reference I wanted to make sure everybody is moving forward from is this disaster cycle. A lot of times I hear these words used interchangeably, and they do mean different things. And I think at the leadership level, it's important that we know the nuances of these words and what they mean so that we're setting clear expectations for our listeners of what to expect in response, what to expect in recovery, because those are 2 different things. So after a disaster, you will incur a lot of resources, typically in larger scale disasters, that will come into your community in response. You'll have volunteers that will come and help with cleanup, that will do muck and gut, that will put tarps on roofs, that will provide medical supplies, food, right? You have that influx of donations. You will also have search and rescue going on. FEMA will come in and do assessments if it's a large scale disaster. Those are all things that happen, or activities that happen in what we call response. Sometimes I've heard before in the media, they'll say a few weeks post-disaster, recovery efforts are wrapping up. And that can be very disheartening for a survivor to hear whose house just got gutted or whose home has a hole in the roof, because they're looking at, I'm nowhere near recovery, right? What we really mean is response is wrapping up, right? We've got people in temporary housing, we've met their emergent needs, right? That occurs in that first window after a disaster. That window could last weeks, it could last months. Some other things that happen in that response window is FEMA claims, FEMA appeals, insurance claims, insurance appeals, right? Getting survivors connected to resources quickly during that time-sensitive window. And then the community has to stand up what we call long-term recovery groups or long-term recovery efforts. Some counties, it'll be called a long-term recovery group. Other counties, it may be called something like AidNet in East Tennessee. But the focus is that community leaders stand up to lead their recovery, because community leaders are sensitive to the needs of their disaster and the needs of their community. And then eventually, as we lead through long-term recovery group and we work towards, or long-term recovery, and we work towards getting our survivors whole after a disaster, eventually we can start to think towards mitigation and preparedness. But moving forward, as I talk about long-term recovery, I just want to make sure we're clear that response is that initial window and recovery is that long-term piece where we're working to get everybody safe, sanitary, and secure. Another bit of knowledge I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with is this national framework for long-term recovery. So the agency called National VOAD, which stands for Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, they set a national framework for how communities should lead recovery. Okay, so you have this large umbrella of national VOAD partners like American Red Cross, Catholic Charities, St. Vincent de Paul, UMCOR, AmeriCares, Good 360. You have all of these agencies working together at the national level to coordinate resources in response and in recovery. You also have at the state level, state VOADs. And so our state VOAD director is Jim Garrett, right? And after a disaster, he's going to help to coordinate and get those resources from the national level down to the county level. He's got that better situational awareness, working hand in hand with emergency management to make sure that we know where's the need, right? What's the data saying? Where are the gaps? And he's connecting those resources from the national or state level down to the county level. And then at the county level in recovery, we start to set up what's called long-term recovery groups, okay? Some counties are blessed before a disaster by having this already in place where they can quickly activate. Others, like ours, we had no framework before the disaster, and so we had to stand it up in real time while our community was going through crisis. So the long-term recovery group, like I said before, the goal of that is your local trusted leaders guiding recovery for your survivors. Okay, the long-term recovery group traditionally is not focused on rebuilding municipalities, rebuilding businesses. They're focusing on households, which allows your city leadership or your county leadership to focus on your municipalities and your economy. That long-term recovery group, based on the national framework set by National VOAD, should have a variety of committees. You're going to have your executive board, your board of directors that's guiding decision-making processes, and then you might have a donations and warehousing committee. They might be one, they might be separate, it depends upon the need, but they're going to focus on managing those in-kind donations and making sure we're doing it in organized fashion. We often call donations the disaster within the disaster because we'll get flooded with resources that we may or may not need, and then we have to divert manpower and space to manage those resources. Our case management partner for about 4 or 5 months after, or our case management supervisor for about 4 or 5 months after the disaster, her garage was full of clothes, and that's what she would do. She would work at the long-term recovery group and then go home and keep sorting clothes every day. 4 months. So we want to make sure we have a really well-organized warehousing and donations crew that can make sure that we're advocating for what resources our community needs to avoid that crisis. We also are going to have a case management committee. We were blessed in that we had multiple partners come to the table to help with case management. That's not always the case, but because we had both Catholic Charities and UMCOR, which is the Methodist branch, come to the table to support survivors, hold their hand through the recovery process, we had a case management committee that made sure we're coordinating resources between both agencies, we're avoiding duplication of benefits, and making sure that we're identifying gaps and filling those gaps in real time. We also are going to have a construction and volunteer committee. I think you guys should have been provided a handout as a one-pager of statistics. If you look at the top of that, that has a list of agencies that operated in construction in addition to the LTRG managing repairs internally, right? So when you think about, you've got to take survivors from case management all the way through to getting repaired, and you might have a variety of materials, variety of funders, a variety of construction and repair partners, and then volunteer teams with varied skills. You've got to have a very well-organized construction and volunteer organization committee that's making sure that we are plugging in those resources in real time to do things efficiently. It's challenging, but that's why it takes a committee working through that. We also are going to have a finance committee that's going to manage the LTRG's finances, and they may also manage the unmet needs funding. Sometimes that's a separate committee. It was for us. And unmet needs is what's referred to as the table of last resort. And what that means is a case manager works hand in hand with the survivor to identify what are your disaster-specific needs, right, related to the tornado or related to the flood, and we're going to create a disaster recovery plan or a DRP. Right? And we're going to identify what exactly does the survivor, what's the survivor's ownership in getting them to recovery? What actions do they have to take to move their case forward? What actions are the case manager going to take to move their case forward? Okay? Based on that disaster recovery plan, we're going to seek resources for that survivor. Those could be local, those could be state, those could be national. And we're going to plug those in to help bring that survivor closer to recovery over time. Typically, those resources are enough, but sometimes they're not, and that's where that survivor would go to what we call the table of last resort. They may have a $10,000 medical bill left over as a result of being hospitalized after a tornado. They may have still need to replace a vehicle. They may have a gap in doing a complete rebuild. Maybe they needed a complete rebuild, and we have a $30,000 gap in getting them recovered. That's going to go to an unmet needs table of funders anonymously to make sure that bias is not brought into the picture when we're making decisions on who gets resources. And that case is going to be presented anonymously and say, here's the survivor's need, here's what resources were brought to the table, and here's the gap. And then those unmet needs funders can pledge dollars and say, I can give $5,000 towards that $10,000 gap, or I can cover the entire thing. And then lastly, we're going to have our spiritual and emotional committee. Our goal is not just the stuff, but to make sure that survivors are provided resources to cope with the trauma of a disaster, a life-altering event. So now that we've gotten that stuff out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about specifically what happened in Graves County. So Mayfield and Graves County, like I said, did not have an LTRG prior to the 2021 tornado. We stood up afterwards and we got 501c3 status. This is our mission statement. Essentially, we want to provide coordinated case management, logistical and warehouse support, and we want to advocate for ongoing resources and preparedness within community agencies. You guys are, I'm sure, very familiar with this map, but this was the night that kicked off our journey, right? We're down there in Mayfield in Graves County. We took a direct hit through our city center. We lost 8 historic churches, over 60 businesses. Almost all of our municipalities were destroyed. Even though we are a very large county, majority of our municipalities were downtown Mayfield or directly in the path of the tornado. So we lost our courthouse, fire department, police station, post office, school bus garage. We lost our water treatment plant, our electric, our power grid, 2 water towers, Pilgrim's grain silos. We lost a lot directly in that city center and also out in the county. When we look at household impact, 1,100 units were destroyed, 400 were damaged, 400 were completely destroyed, 260 units were removed from our rental stock. When you think about the national housing crisis, right, and then you think about that, how that impacts rural communities, and then you exacerbate that by a tornado that takes out your city center and a majority of available and affordable housing. We had a housing crisis. 65, I've seen different statistics, but between 65 and 70% of our survivors were renters, which posed another problem because traditionally, based on national VOAD guidelines, we don't repair rentals because what traditionally happens is if you go in and you put philanthropic dollars into that home to support that survivor, the tenant typically will, after the repair is done, kick that survivor out and then raise the rent and bring somebody else in. So this poses a unique challenge, and it's not just our community that's gone through this. Many LTRGs around the nation are faced with this challenge of how do we support renters. So for us, it looked like providing first month's rent and a utility deposit to get them into safe, sanitary, and secure housing if they were willing and able to move. Because the other issue we dealt with was that rent either doubled or tripled in most of our county because of the lack of housing stock and the demand. When we look at the county as a whole, we had 3,800 FEMA claims. We know there were additional households that did not apply for FEMA. We had an $8.5 million FEMA verified loss. And of that, FEMA provided $5.8 million roughly in payouts. That supported home repairs, rental assistance. They could get up to $40,000 to go towards a rebuild or repair needs. But think about if you had to rebuild your entire home and for whatever reason you weren't insured and you were given $40,000, that's going to leave a significant gap, right? And so that's where the long-term recovery group comes in. So going back to this disaster cycle, what I've talked about so far is getting us through response, right? We've looked at the data, we've done assessments, we've started doing FEMA payouts, they've worked through insurance with claims, right? And we still have gaps. And this is where the LTRG comes in. This is where your community starts to gather at community meetings and decide how are we going to lead our recovery, right? We start to set up our committees that I referenced earlier. Okay, so our committee meetings began around February and March. It didn't get fully organized until March of 2022. So event happened in December. Community meetings get full throttle around March. Right? We get 501c3 status around May, so we weren't able to have fiscal ownership or fiscal responsibility until May, which means we had to rely on a fiscal sponsor up until then. And then we didn't have a warehouse operational until August. And we were told that we were efficient. And when I reflect on that timeline, I don't see that as being efficient. Our disaster happened in December, and our survivors had to wait until August for us to get going. But since our LTRG has stood up, because of our scale and efficiency, our national partners have referred us out to LTRGs from Hawaii to Florida, Arkansas, Mississippi to troubleshoot and support them in getting going. And I'm routinely talking to LTRGs that are 6 months, a year and a half, even 2 years, and have not gotten organized. So there is a gap here, and there is a need to support our counties in getting this infrastructure in place, ideally proactively. When we look at case management specifically at the LTRG and Mayfield, our goal was holistic recovery, right? Not just the stuff, but the person too, right? Meeting those spiritual and emotional needs as well. Reducing duplication of benefits so that our donors felt confident in sowing into this disaster. Supporting verification processes. We need to prove that you are who you say you are and you were disaster impacted. Because believe it or not, there's a lot of fraud. And so we want to do our due diligence and making sure we're weeding that out. And we want to provide every survivor with the opportunity to recover. That does not mean that every survivor will recover because, like I said before, when we draw up that disaster recovery plan, there are pieces of it that the case management agency and the long-term recovery group that they own, and there are pieces of it that the survivor needs to own as well to move their case forward with wraparound supports. Okay? So it takes a team effort to get all the way to the finish line. We internally hired navigators thanks to a grant that we received to process the Team Western Kentucky funds. Those were given out in installments of up to $3,500 per survivor and then eventually an additional $1,000. Early on, we were given 2 months to call roughly 4,000 households and get them fully verified process estimates and then submit them for approval with the state. Thankfully, they realized that that was a lofty goal, especially when most of our LTRGs were doing this on volunteers at the time. And so we were given an extension and eventually multiple extensions to help us through that process. And we coordinated very closely with TWK-UMC, which is the local branch of UMCOR, the Methodist church that works in disaster. They managed a lot of our disaster recovery. They brought about 20 or 21 case managers to the table. Again, we had to go through about 4,000 cases. So when you look at 20 available DCMs or disaster case managers and a large caseload, it took time, okay? So we had to prioritize those cases and work hand in hand to get survivors towards recovery. Here's just a quick glance at the numbers. We're down to just 17 left, which I'm super excited about. We ended up with about 1,600 households. And when I say 17 households, not 17 people. We have roughly 1,600 households that have been provided assistance in some form, whether that was a referral or going through the full case management process, getting a rebuild, getting a repair, getting replaced items. We processed roughly $865,000 of the Team Western Kentucky funds to go towards unmet needs in Graves County alone. And our monetary value of partner commitments to date is roughly $8.5 million, or $8.15 million. Again, like I said, we wanted to provide wraparound services. So not just the stuff, but also having disaster survivor support groups, Project Resilience and Project Recovery, which were grant-funded projects that came in and provided counseling for the survivor and for responding groups. Trauma-informed crisis counseling that's available virtually and in multiple languages. Cards for Calamity that we could give out to support groups to lead these discussions locally. And then also the National Disaster Distress Helpline. We operate out of a 32,000 square foot warehouse on roughly 4 acres. At one point, we had around 20 additional Connex containers because we weren't just housing the LTRG stuff, but we were housing stuff for all of the various construction partners that came to the table to provide repairs. We have a fleet of vehicles and some equipment that supports those logistics, again, not just for the LTRG, but also for our partners. Here's our location. We're located right off I-69, which has made it very convenient for volunteers and our donations to get in and out of our facility. Roughly $1.7 million of in-kind donations has been leveraged through our warehouse to date. That's supported agencies like New Lease on Life, UMCOR, Camp Graves, Samaritan's Purse, and many others. And we're very thankful to the partners like Good 360, Matthew 25 Ministries, and others that has sewed into that. We've also coordinated volunteers. Like I said earlier, we have our volunteer committee, which focuses on getting volunteer housing, doing skills assessments, matching volunteers to projects, then providing oversight while they're working on those projects. To date, 87,000 hours of volunteer hours has been served. And with the monetary value of that, based on Kentucky Serves, which values 1 hour of volunteer labor in this sort of work at $28.53, that brings us to the monetary value of volunteer labor to roughly $2.5 million. So we're very thankful for the many partners that have come to the table and continue to. When I first got going in helping some friends that were directly impacted by the tornado, somebody made a comment to me. They said, it's great that people are going now, but a year from now, they'll forget about Mayfield. And I'm very, very blessed and honored to say that 3 years out, almost 4 years out, we still have volunteer teams. So we had a team in yesterday. We have teams coming in a few weeks. They're still coming to the table to keep things moving forward and to recover our final survivors that need help. So we're very thankful. Like I said, you guys have an update of those construction numbers. Here are a few of the partners. There were many that came to the table to support construction in our community because of the need. Not every community had as great of a need, and not every community ended up with as many partners coming to the table. Because of the size of our disaster, we had many construction partners at the table. The goal of every construction partner remains the same if you're part of the National VOAD network, and that is the 3 S's: safe, sanitary, and secure. So an example of that could look like we were doing a flood repair and the survivor needed some flooring redone. And while we were there, she mentioned that she'd recently been robbed and her front door had been broken and she hadn't had the money to fix it yet. Well, she's not safe. So we fixed the front door, right? Typically, we're not going to do add-ons. We're not going to do embellishments. We're not going to, our goal is at or better and safe, sanitary, and secure, okay? So looking at our disaster cycle, when you think about our timeline, we're coming on the 4-year mark. Right? We could have shaved off months, if not longer, had we had this structure in place proactively. So it's something I would like for you guys to consider is in your jurisdictions, what work is being done to make sure that we're preserving long-term recovery structure to lead our community through recovery for the long haul. After that influx of response agencies have come and left, who is there to keep things moving forward? Because long-term recovery is a marathon. right? Response is the sprint, and then we need people equipped at the community level to take us through the marathon, especially if you're hit by subsequent disasters. So not only were we dealing with one of the largest tornadoes that's hit our state, but since that we've dealt with the July 19th, 2023 flood. We set the state record for the total rainfall that falls in a 24-hour period. We had 139 households impacted. 121 of those wanted ongoing support in recovery. We were still dealing with tornado, and now we had to pivot and do response and recovery, right? But the blessing is we were already there. So instead of getting active in 8 months or a year, the next week, were out doing assessments, right? Because we had that infrastructure in place. Fast forward to the Memorial Day storms of last year. We had a small tornado come through our town. We also had straight line winds. We had around 50 households impacted that needed volunteer support and cleaning up debris, making their homes accessible again. Fast forward to April 2nd through 6th, right? One of the more recent events that our state has faced. And we dealt with flooding. Thankfully, our flooding wasn't as severe as some of the other counties that were hit. But I always add the caveat to that statement that for that survivor, it doesn't matter if there was only 40 in our county that were hit, because they themselves are dealing with a life-altering event. All three of these disasters were not federally declared. Between 70 to 80%, depending upon what statistic you're looking at and who the source is, of disasters are not federally declared. 70 to 80%. So that means your community is sometimes on their own. We're blessed that because we've stayed organized, we have a robust partner network that's continued to come to the table. Right? And that's our goal moving forward, is that we can keep those partner networks, not just in our community, but across Western Kentucky as well. We want to continue growing that disaster-ready network. We want to expedite screening and that transition to long-term recovery. We want to support Darcy and the Disaster Readiness Center initiatives as they build out more robust structure in West Kentucky and beyond. One of our goals, which I'm very thankful for this opportunity, is to educate local and state representatives of what it takes to lead long-term recovery. I'm taking you through this shallow of a insight into what long-term recovery is, but I'm very happy to have follow-up conversations if you want to get deeper in the weeds, if you want to connect our LTRG with agencies in your county that are wanting to get infrastructure in place. We're here to be a resource, because we don't believe. While there is a national framework and there is a national outline of what LTRG looks like, we don't think it's fair for LTRGs to keep having to recreate the wheel. All of the systems, all of the policies, all of the procedures, we had to draft that from scratch or rely on partners who were gracious enough to give it to us, right? And we don't think that should be the case. So our goal is, if you have counties, if you have communities that need support, we'll share them, any resources we can. We'll troubleshoot with them as they're going through recovery to make sure they don't have to go it alone. Because not a single member on our team was trained and educated in long-term recovery before the disaster happened. Every single person had to learn it while their community was going through crisis, right? And that shouldn't be the case. Our goal is to pre-position people that aren't just experienced in the emergency management department, but that are experienced in long-term recovery, so they can carry their community through that marathon of work. Lastly, we want to provide warehousing logistical support, not just in Graves County, but beyond, and then operate in community preparedness and mitigation programs. In a few weeks, we'll be going with partnering with the Second Christian Church in Mayfield to do a talk about prepping your go bags and analyzing your insurance policies and making sure that at the household level you're prepared. So we're excited about the opportunities ahead and the partnerships we've grown. We're very thankful for the many partnerships that have come to the table to make this work possible. And I'm very thankful for the time to speak with you guys about Long-Term Recovery Group. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amy, and appreciate the presentation. And I was one of those a few months ago that came to Mayfield, and of course I'm from Marshall, next county over, but appreciated the presentation that day that you gave to us. You'd mentioned, you kind of answered a question that I had just a few moments ago, but talking about the importance of setting up that framework, like the 501c3. And even if your community has not experienced any of this, just setting up that framework so that if that, or hopefully it never does happen, but if it does, that you're so much further ahead that if that does happen, that you're already ready to go to accept those donations. And you spoke on that, but just how do you encourage members of communities and others to get get that started.
Our goal when we're talking with communities proactively prior to disaster is to start with your emergency management, because you want to make sure while we're operating kind of parallel to one another, because again, their goal was response, their goal was municipalities, road and bridge structures, we still need to be coordinating, especially in those early days after a disaster, to make sure that we're communicating where to get assistance. So we're going to start with our EM, and we're going to work with them to identify leaders in your community that have the capacity to give towards getting at least your basic, get your board of directors in place, right? Let them read the LTRG manual that National VOAD has set out. We can sit together and do trainings on the basic setup of the different committees. And if they want to take it a step further, we can start building out those committees proactively. What churches, what nonprofits, what agencies in your community are ready to support food distribution, donations management, the funding, right? Get that all in place, ideally proactively, so that we can just green light it when disasters happen. And then secondly, get 501c3 status. Support them in achieving that, so that way they have fiscal ownership right from day one. Because something we dealt with is there were so many pockets that opened. Everybody wanted to give. We were very blessed that it happened right before Christmas, right? That pulled on everybody's heartstrings. So there was lots of people that wanted to come to the table to give, but there was a lot of confusion over where to do that, right? And how to make sure that those resources went to survivors. So having that 501c3 status for us has been very helpful in subsequent disasters, because we can make sure that communication is streamlined both with emergency management and local officials.
All right, perfect. We do have a few more questions. Co-Chair Webb?
Thank you. I was in Little Rock the night that hit, and I stayed up all night, tears in my eyes, watching the progress that storm drove back home that way. And it was very impactful. But sometimes out of disaster and necessity come great models. I think you all are a testament to that. The question I have is how, on your VOAD sustainability funding, I mean, what's your sustainability plan to keep that in place?
So VOAD guidelines, they set out a couple different pathways for long-term recovery groups as they start to what we call wind down after a disaster, right? We're wrapping up recovery efforts, so what's next? Some LTRGs will go dormant, where they might just meet quarterly or annually. Some might meet as a COAD. They might work together with some of the neighboring counties to create a regional network. And again, meet in more of a dormancy cycle. And then others may go on, which is what we're hoping to do, in that preparedness and mitigation
And that allow you, I
programming.
mean, your warehouse, your vehicles and things like that, and there's a cost associated with that.
Yes. And so we've been working on, we've got some program logic models, which I believe I may have shared over. And if not, I'm happy to, along with kind of a bare bones budget of what would it take to keep ongoing programming and preparedness and mitigation, as well as programming that's ready to green light when disasters happen in response, along with some work that we can do on a Western Kentucky level instead of just at the county level, because we want to support our neighbors.
I won't hold you to this, but how can we best assess what VOADs are there and regional capacities and what's existing? Would that be through the national, or how do we get that data and assess the ones that are there?
That would be going through probably your state level VOAD, so going through Jim Garrett to get contacts with which counties specifically already have LTRGs, which ones are active, which ones are dormant, and then their success rates from there. And where do we need to plug in resources or build more regional COADs?
I agree with you. I think inventory, is very important. And I think that's something all counties and cities should be to identify that, and volunteers and staff, because we've all got capacity, a disaster capacity in some realm. But I'll ask a question about, I've got people that stay home and risk their life because their animals can't go with them. And I'm sure you see that in tornadoes as well, but especially in flooding. And I would ask, what do you see as an answer to that, or what capacity? And I've tried to coordinate livestock, feed, transport, and all that. It's very hard to do. Can we incorporate a component of that, or is there nationally somewhere to coordinate those things, or a temporary kennel,
Yes.
or those places where people can take their pets, because it's really a safety concern.
Yeah. It is. There are national partners that focus specifically on that. At the National VOAD Conference recently, I sat with the United States Humane Society. They've recently changed their name, and I'm blanking on it right now, but they specifically train counties, and they can pre-position materials as well in different regions to support cohabitation models, as well as like side-by-side models. So if you have let me backtrack. Red Cross, technically all of their temporary shelters are, according to Red Cross's standards, animal friendly. But the facility has the right to say, we won't allow animals, right? And that's usually where you run into your challenge. And so that's where some of those partners can come in and bring in a trailer. Red Cross, I believe, will even bring in a trailer that is air conditioned or heated with kennels so that people can stay inside the shelter and their animal can stay right outside, so they can still manage their care. But that way they're able to bring their pets with them.
A lot of people aren't aware of that.
They're
and
not.
It keeps people at home. But how about on the livestock side?
Yeah, on the livestock side, I can't speak to that because I haven't had firsthand experience, but I can connect you with that agency if you'd like to talk with them. They're a wealth of knowledge in that, and they handle livestock as well. I will also say proactively when events are happening. So, for example, a tornado, we deal with that a lot. We'll put out lists of storm shelters that as we're communicating with our different community agencies and emergency management. And something we've been adding is pet friendly, not pet friendly, must be leashed, must be kenneled, because we have a lot of people that will comment on there and say, I want to go, but I won't leave my pets behind.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And anything you feel like we need to hear or see that we haven't gotten to today, that would be great, because we really appreciate your experience and leadership on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Howell. Turn your mic on.
How about this green light? Look at that. So I'll recap a little bit. I was one of those people that was concerned that a year later there wouldn't be anybody around. And I think a large reason why we still have people there is because of the way you guys were able to hit the ground running. And I wanted to thank you for all the stuff that you and your people have done for our community. It's, that saying that some aspire to greatness and others have it thrust upon them. I think that applies to all of you in that situation. And you never know when or how something like this is going to occur. I wanted to follow up on an answer to a question of Senator Webb. Graves County is large enough and organized enough and has had enough resources, even with what we face there, that we could hit the ground running with enough volunteers and enough local people to do that. In a county of 30 or 40,000, we can do something like that. In a county of 3 or 4,000, it's a different look. Down the road a little bit, in Casey, if JL hadn't been around and knew how to do everything, we would have struggled down there. He's gone now, so I don't know. Hopefully somebody took good notes in case we face something like that again. How applicable is this to apply on a regional model for smaller counties or larger counties that want to join in? Some of our counties have natural associations and linked with larger and smaller counties. Can we replicate this on a more regional basis rather than a county by county basis?
I think the short answer is yes.
The devil's in the details, right?
Yeah. Again, the national model is that while there can be co-ads, right, where those different county LTRGs work together to coordinate materials, response, recovery, they also still believe in that LTRG model because they are. I live in Fulton, and so it's disaster recovery in Fulton is going to look far different than disaster recovery in Mayfield just because of the size, right? But I also need local leaders that are sensitive to the needs of my community that are a little bit different than the needs of Graves.
Sure.
So you're still going to want people at the county level that are able to speak to the needs of that specific community. But yes, there can be co-ed structures where we work together on a regional scale.
A little follow-up, Mr. Chairman, please.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of asking a question to help us as a committee as we work through this to see if there's anything we can do on this. Every situation is different. Every formation is different. Is there any headwinds in doing a multi-county regional go-ahead that we would face that we could help or anticipate or help people work through? I know I'm putting you on the spot there.
No,
so.
I think one of the challenges that we've faced is just capacity. Right? People's capacity to do this work and to invest the time it takes to get this rolling and stay active even in dormancy, right? That's the biggest thing is at that county level, really being strategic about who those leaders are and making sure they have the capacity to carry this through. Because often there's typically high turnover in LTRG leadership, both at the board level and at the executive leadership level, just because the requirements are intense, right? Your community has been decimated typically, and there's a lot of pressures to be in that seat. So I think just making sure the people that you pick, one, are educated ahead of time, and two, have the personal capacity to devote to it, both in blue skies and in disaster or gray skies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Maiden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, can you hear me? So I was there when it happened, and I was there last summer when y'all were cutting the ribbon on the new city hall. And I'll have to say, I've been through a lot of disasters. I've never seen a recovery in 3 years like you all went. I think they were also announcing, how many units did you announce that did they build?
Units of
Apartments, rentals, or something. They were building a big.
I don't know off the top of my head about the rental stock.
Yeah, so they were. I mean, it was amazing the how far you had come in that short time. Even though 3 years is a long time, but of course, Marilyn Ann is a good friend of mine, and she has been a trooper. I know that for you all, but. I guess I'm gonna kind of shoot this more at Eric than I am you. I know, most counties have emergency management directors, and they have plans, and of course they don't ever kick them in. But I can just imagine what a help this would be to Eric if counties had this set up. Eric, do you know how many counties have long-term recoveries?
We have 13 active, one underway, but one's not exactly super active, but we have 13 in the state.
Yeah. I know in my county we don't, and we have a lot of floods, and it'd be amazing if we had that, like Senator Webb was saying, if we had stuff already. I mean, because when it happens, we're on the phone calling, trying to, can we use the school, can we use the gym, can we, so, you hate to legislate something like that on counties, but it's like an insurance policy. Nobody ever wants to pay it till somebody dies, and then, nobody ever wants that till they has a disaster, but, I can just see such a great advantage for that program right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Good questions.
I believe, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No,
I believe the state of Illinois recently did mandate that because Williamson County reached out to us about a year ago and said we've been mandated as emergency management that we will have long-term recovery structure, but we've been given no resources nor support to get it going. So they called on us because somebody had said that we were still organized, and they came and toured, and we've shared all of our resources with them to help them get going.
That's kind of what I meant. I wouldn't mind to mandate it if we could fund it, but I hate to put an unfunded mandate on it.
Yeah, unfunded mandate. All right, Senator Reed.
Thank you. My first question was, do you know how many counties are are set up for this? And the answer is 13, I hear. So the second question is, in Shelby County, where I'm in my district, I attended a VOAD meeting a couple months back, and I know they're in the process of getting that going, but do you know or aware of any, or have I might have missed that in your brief, recruiting processes and like online places for people to go who want to volunteer for something like this?
So let me just make sure I'm clarifying. Want to volunteer for operating like the long-term recovery group specifically, or volunteer?
VOAD or long-term recovery groups.
I don't know of any online resources to solicit, applications or people that are interested. I don't offhand, but I think just going through your local media, making sure that you've got a good communications team. Recently in a training, they said the first thing a nonprofit should do is hire their ED, and the second thing is a comms person, right? So try and get somebody that's really good at communications and start hitting the ground running with getting some good people at the table.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Senator Herron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for your presentation. And a lot of my questions have already been answered as well. But Senator Maiden, one of the things that I was thinking about was how could we set something up like this and not mandate, but maybe incentivize that if counties do this or regions set up this long-term recovery, then how can we as a state help fund that beginning process? So maybe we can think about some type of incentivization as far as if you decide to do this, then we have funds available to help stand it up. It's something that I was thinking about. And the other thing that I do have a question about, early on in your slides, you said that there were $500 million in FEMA dollars that came here. Do you all have a breakdown, or is there a breakdown as far as that $500 million, how that was spent or has been spent?
I do not, but I would assume if you go on FEMA's website that there may be some information. That's where that statistic was pulled from. I do know Graves County specifically for 2021 tornado is roughly $50 million, and that was both for the survivors and for the municipalities.
And then, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I've got one more thing.
Yes.
You mentioned about the rent when folks come into communities, renters, their homes may be rehabbed, and then the owners raise the rent. Have you seen anywhere where there's some type of mandate that after some national disaster that maybe that there's something in place to where people can't raise the rent for 12 months or 24 months? Is that something that's been done anywhere nationally, or just what's your thoughts on something like that?
I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I do think that is a wonderful idea. I mean, something we deal with frequently is survivors that are on a fixed income that have lived in that rental for 10, 15 years, have paid that rent faithfully for 10, 15 years, and now that rental price has been increased or as much as tripled. And think about, you're talking to a survivor that might bring home $900 a month on disability, and now their rent is $1,100. What's the answer? So it's a challenge, and it's something that would be worth addressing.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Any further questions? All right. Not seeing any questions. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, guys.
All right. We've got one more speaker coming up, and that's from the Community Action Committee, Community Action Kentucky. And that's Rick Baker. He's the Executive Director. And also Harold Monroe, the Chief Executive Officer. We'll give them a second to get comfortable and get anything they need to get on the computer there. And once they are comfortable, I'll let them introduce themselves and get started. And just make sure your green light is bright green.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Rick Baker, the Executive Director of Community Action Kentucky, that represents the 23 community action agencies across the state. And I'll let Harold introduce himself.
Harold Monroe. I'm the CEO of the Pennyroyal Allied Community Services down in the Pennyroyal counties. Down there, people may not recognize our name, but they know us by the acronym PACS. So,
All right. Again, good morning. I would like to thank Co-Chair Webb and Co-Chair Freeland for inviting us to do a presentation of community actions efforts around disaster response across the state. Again, Community Action is a statewide network. There's 23 agencies with outreach offices in all 120 Kentucky counties. We are the only community-based organization that has a physical presence in all 120 Kentucky counties. We're also the only community-based organization that is mandated by law to have a tripartite board of directors. 1/3 of our representatives, at least 1/3 are low-income representatives, at least 1/3 are public elected officials, and the remaining are private sector representatives. And most county judges and mayors sit on or have a seat at our boards. Collectively, the network works to empower low-income individuals and families to attain economic stability and long-term success in all 120 counties. Serving as a lifeline to hundreds of thousands of Kentuckians each year, community action agencies provide crucial programs and resources that address the unique needs of their communities. Every agency is required at least every 2 years to complete a comprehensive needs assessment that identifies the local needs in each local community, not just even at the county level, but community level, and then use their resources to address those needs, either directly through the resources they have or through collective partnerships. The Community Services Block Grant, or CSBG, is the agency's core federal funding. It is the source of funding that makes community action agencies community action agencies. The other thing that makes us unique is we're not only a statewide network covering all 120 counties, but we're also part of 1,000 agencies nationwide. And we'll see a lot of times in disaster responses that we will have other states all across the country that will donate resources and actually bring folks. I know I served 34 years at a local agency in Eastern Kentucky before coming to the state association, and we had sister agencies from West Virginia and Tennessee that actually brought volunteers and donated goods into our local areas when we had the flooding in Eastern Kentucky and helped coordinate that response. Again, we are responsive to community needs. We like to say that if you've seen one community action agency, you've seen one community action agency because they are unique in that they are locally needs driven. You'll see that they operate everything from transportation services to resource coordination, distribution, facility access for emergency use, partnerships with local organizations and state agencies, and direct support for individuals impacted when it comes to disaster response. But every day in our local communities, they operate everything from Head Start programs to senior citizens programs and literally everything in between. And even though the main goal is to help and assist low income and working families, we often have programs that are available to just the general public. I know that Harold is going to touch on public transportation. Over half of our agencies are public transit providers that provide transportation services across the state as well. Going back specifically to disaster case management, we were the FEMA contractor. Community Action was and subgranted to the community action agencies to provide disaster case management following the Western Kentucky tornadoes and Eastern Kentucky flooding. We addressed disaster-related needs through individualized case management, coordinating resources and referrals for recovery assistance, advocating for survivors to access available services, partnering with long-term recovery groups, emergency management personnel, and state federal agencies to ensure survivors receive comprehensive support. And we were lucky that kind of the timing, the unfortunate timing, there was already a disaster case management contract open for the Western Kentucky tornadoes that we were able to get the East going basically about the same time as we did the West because the grant was already open and we were able to tag on that. And that's one thing to keep in mind moving forward, that anytime that there is an open disaster, unfortunately, that those disaster case management services can be tagged on to an existing grant so that you can get those services up and going quicker. In the Western Kentucky tornadoes, again, 16 counties were affected to receive disaster case management services provided through West Kentucky Allied Services, Community Action of Southern Kentucky, and Penny Rowell Allied Community Services. And I'm going to have Harold to share today some of the critical assistance that they applied during the disaster. And the one thing that I always like to say, actually, the Federal Department for Office of Community Services actually came in and filmed Community Action's response to disaster response as a result of the tornadoes and the flooding, and they actually have that available on their website that I'll share with you guys. And what I told them during the disaster is Community Action are in the communities before the disaster happens. During the disaster, oftentimes, the agency itself is affected, and we have members of our staff that are affected, but we're there during the disaster, and then we're there long after all of the big dollars and resources are gone, actively involved in local long-term recovery groups. I know in Hazard and Perry County is where I live, and there I was part of that long-term recovery group initially, and we remain active, the Community Action Agency does, in that group today, continuing to provide the long-term services. So I'm going to turn it over to Harold to share some of what PACS help provide in that immediate disaster response.
Thank you. During the tornado era, probably the area that we helped at least initially the most was we got contacted for assisting with transportation, especially for some of the areas not only down in Mayfield, even though that's a different community action agency, but in the Caldwell, Hopkins, Muhlenberg counties, as far as Dawson Springs especially being hit that basically ran a 14-hour shuttle to all the various locations, picking people up, taking them where they needed to be. And sometimes it was, with the initial response, a lot of the people, especially like in Dawson Springs, got relocated to Madisonville or where else. But then they needed to be back there to take care of and find out what was going on. So we ran a shuttle nonstop from that standpoint. And Rick kind of touched on this, what was happening. Our transportation headquarters was impacted with the tornado. We lost part of our transportation facility in the middle of all that. So our people not only stepped up for that, but were impacted as well. But we did that. And even sometimes, I know that with the people down in Graves County, Mayfield, we were contacted about trying to provide some transportation for them. And so we got some vehicles and some drivers down there committed to them. And the previous presenter shared about the overwhelming response with people in Graves County, Mayfield. And after about a week or so, we were even in contact, say, hey, we don't really need y'all's transportation assistance here to move it where we could be. But during that time, we've assisted like the senior citizen centers with making sure that seniors got meals. We had some of our partners actually bring pallets of meals that we helped to deliver through our Meals on Wheels type programs and all. And I think the biggest thing for us is that we are there and able to help in any capacity that we can. And it is quite honestly sometimes learn as we go. We don't know exactly what that need's going to be, but can you be there? We'll be there. And sometimes it's as simple as we had a lot of assistance we provided to nursing homes and even some hospitals with moving patients because they had to get relocated. And just like the recent flood we had a few weeks ago in Christian County, we got contacted by the judge and can y'all transport our inmates out of the jail that's getting underwater, and we moved them to our senior citizen center for a while. And so it's kind of like it really is hard to put a pinpoint exactly what we could do because we basically just do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. And to my knowledge, we never said no or turned anyone down when we had that need, because at the end of the day, we had folks experiencing the very thing that these other communities were experiencing while we were trying to meet that need. So it hits close to home.
Okay. And as well, we were doing the disaster case management for the Eastern Kentucky floods, community action, again, subgrantee with the Big Sandy Community Action, LKLP Community Action, and Middle Kentucky Community Action to provide disaster case management in 13 counties following the flooding. From July of 2022 to July 24, we opened 903 cases. 605 cases have successfully closed or had resolution. Families served, 48% were employed, 49% were on a fixed income, and DCM staff leveraged goods, services, resources, and donations for a total of $3.9 million for return on investment. And again, I think it's important as well to make sure that everyone fully realizes that even though most of the agencies, 22 of the 23 are private nonprofits, they do receive, all of those receive well over $500,000 in federal funding and are required every year to have an independent audit completed, and that is presented to their board and approved by their board and then sent to funding sources. So they are highly accountable as well. It's not that, nobody knows how the funds are being expended. They are overseen by a board of directors. Again, that's a tripartite board of directors, and that independent audit is completed every single year. Kentucky's Community Action Network is equipped to respond to disasters immediately and support long-term recovery efforts through case management services. With the infrastructure, experience, and relationships needed to deliver results, we stand ready to support Kentucky's communities in their recovery efforts. Kentucky's community action networks provide mobilization, training, and hiring statewide. We have a statewide software system that all agencies use that allow us to quickly implement and track any type of service that may need to be implemented very quickly. We have reporting abilities as well on that we can report statewide. Fiscal management, again, that I just discussed. Community outreach, and agency services and programs. And again, you'll have some agencies that may have a very limited number of services, have a small service area, maybe 1 or 2 counties, and may have a budget as low as $5 million, up to some of the larger agencies that cover up to 10 counties, have some major programs that they operate that could be in the neighborhood of $50 to $60 million. But it's all based on local needs, local driven. Again, that community needs assessment that's done at least every 2 years to identify needs and then to address and target services to address those needs. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning to present, to let you know a little bit more about what Community Action does. We hope that we will be in front of you on other committees to let you know more of what we do, because there's so many services that our agencies provide to the citizens of our Commonwealth, and we're here to assist you with anything that you may want to do as well. So, thank you.
And thank you so much, Mr. Baker. And just one quick question for Mr. Monroe. And you mentioned the Christian County example. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a naturally or federally declared disaster that you respond to.
No, we got the call from Christian County, of course, while it was still raining. The rain hadn't even stopped yet. And so, no, it doesn't have to be that. And you know, it's honestly, if we see a need, we try to respond to it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it does not have to be a declared disaster. I know on any given day, unfortunately, with any kind of weather-related or any other type of emergency situation, oftentimes, especially when it comes, I know, to transportation, a lot of our agencies are called on. I know in Perry County, when the flooding happened, we had a nursing home that reached out, that night and said, hey, we need to evacuate, and we got drivers on the road. We got people in there and got them moved out as quickly as possible. And that's just one example.
Yeah, that's good to know. You quick. It's a better response that way.
Yeah.
All right, Co-Chair Webb, you have a question?
Just a couple, Mr. Chairman. Rick, we've been working together a long time. I appreciate it, and I know how you all are on the ground, and I appreciate the east-west approach here because we have a lot in common, but we also have unique challenges to our different areas in disaster and recovery both. But I just said, you mentioned you had an information network statewide. And that you maybe was hopeful, but I heard that maybe you have some inventory information in that. Did I hear that correct? What kind of information do you have county to county?
Well, we do. Like I said, we have a statewide software system that we use for providing service and service tracking. To where we can determine, what families are receiving, what their needs are. We do case management with them. So we do have information in that system that we could, and I can get you more details of exactly what we do have in it. And all of our agencies, like I say, complete that comprehensive needs assessment, and that's actually filed with their CSBG grant application every year, and that's actually at the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. It's actually provided, and it receives public input as well. And if you guys would be interested in seeing any of those from your local agencies, we can definitely get copies of that to share with you.
I'd be interested because I think that's all the data that we can put in the clearinghouse, so to speak, and know and encourage locals to do these inventories. And what I think that's part of what we need to be doing here in this agency. And then as far as if a disaster hits, you all have an existing staff and they're pretty busy with what they do. So how do you activate your staff, and do you have the ability for part-time hiring or contracting within your network?
Yes, most agencies are actually included in part of their local disaster emergency plan that each agency develops. I know the agencies that provide transportation, they're part of that. and they have staff that are notified, whether it be the executive director or the program level based upon the need, that they can reach out to and then immediately start activating staff. I know that, like I said, when the flooding hit in eastern Kentucky, and every time that it does hit, unfortunately, in eastern Kentucky, we have staff that immediately, they have names of they have the personal cell phones of the dispatchers where they can immediately start mobilizing staff and getting people on the road. And they do have, agencies do have the ability, if they need to hire temporary part-time staff, bring in additional staff or contract staff, they all have the ability
Is
to
that
do that.
relationship with emergency management pretty consistent in throughout the state?
I really would hate to say that it is or it isn't, because I don't know exactly how that exists. And I know that we had a close relationship in our local agency, and I think that most do have a good relationship with their and again, like I said, every county judge executive has a seat on the board, whether they personally sit or if they have a representative to sit. I know in my 4 counties of LKLP, which was Leslie, not Letcher Perry, the 4 county judges sit on that board, and we were constantly talking about, coordination and what can we do, unfortunately, in the case of a disaster or any other kind of an event. So,
Well, thank you. Thank y'all for being here.
you're very welcome.
Thank you, Representative Hart.
I'm just curious. I'm somewhat familiar with some of your agency's responses, but could you give us some more, maybe specific examples of how your networks work to respond and help each other during a disaster?
You mean, I'll start on that anyway. A couple things. One, when we had the tornado in West Kentucky in 21, we ended up having some of our Eastern Kentucky agencies actually brought a truck full of diapers, truck of water, just to bring down and drop off at West Kentucky agency as well as our agency, for then the people in the community that needed some of those basic needs to come and get. We had a couple of partnerships with like United Healthcare. We do some work through our Connect program with, they're one of the vendors, or not vendors, but one of the options that people can look at with regards to Medicare, Medicaid. And they brought pallets of meals and brought to our warehouse, and then we turned around and distributed those to with our aging program when we were delivering meals to seniors, and brought them to our senior centers for people to come up and pick up that might need some meals like that. So, those are just a couple of little examples real quick of what people did. We reached out to our West Kentucky agency who lost their offices, and we also run a family preservation program. We have the contract in the purchase area with that. Our office miraculously wasn't impacted that we have in Mayfield. And we opened up that for them to start doing their case management for their CSBG clients that needed help, and they worked out of our offices. So that's the kind of network that we have with community action across the state, and I really think one of the biggest strengths and probably most under-tapped advantage of community actions in Kentucky is we have literally a presence in every county. And I'm in the Penny Royal, we're a 9-county agency. I have 24 offices in the 9 counties. So we have 24 physical locations in the 9 counties that we serve, that if one's impacted, like our transportation office was partially damaged with the tornado, we're still able to function because we also have a transportation hub, dispatch office in Madisonville. So we were able to kind of tap into all of that. But those are just a couple examples to stick out. Now, Senator Webb asked earlier about staffing and all that. One of the challenges we had during the tornado was in the midst of COVID, and you couldn't replace a vehicle for 3 or 4 years, and it got to where your fleet. So we had some challenges with that, and honestly, what we did was we ended up having to reallocate some of our, like we run an intercity transportation, taking people to Nashville, to the VA, to the Vanderbilt, to the airports or whatnot. So we rerouted some services, or stopped some temporary services to try to do that. But then at the same time, we had some of our staff and the programs that they were running weren't as impacted by the disaster. So we ended up having some of our staff who normally wouldn't be delivering meals to seniors or driving and assisting that we moved them into that temporarily to try to meet what the need was at the time. Because we've been around long enough as entities that we know this too will pass, and this crisis we have right here, it may be a year or two, but it won't last forever, and there'll be something else that comes up that we need to respond to.
Thank you for that. I mean, one of the reasons I asked the question, a lot of people and a lot of us, we're very familiar with what fire, police, EMS, first responders do in an emergency, but people don't realize. I'm a retired firefighter, paramedic, and I've worked a lot of incidences throughout my career. And the one thing that I've noticed and realized, it's the basic necessities has got to be met immediately. That we, as first responders, a lot of times we don't have the resources or are equipped to deal with that. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to elaborate on that for the simple fact, next to emergency management, in my experience, you're all the only agency that has a physical presence in all 120 counties. And as we move forward with this task force, that's a resource that we're not going to be able to repeat and that we're going to need to build on. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity to give a little bit more specific examples. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hart. Senator Maiden?
I'd echo what Representative Hart said there. I served on a community action, and I think their most unutilized thing in the county, because I had no idea what all you all did till I started serving on the board. From I knew what lie heap was when everybody was lined up outside. It was time to file your application. But job placement, lie heap, insulation. It's just so many things that y'all do. But I guess my question is, if a county gets declared an emergency, does that trigger any additional funds for you all to assist, or you just got to work off of your budget?
No, it actually can for agencies, and that's something that we're going to be spending resources on, developing that ability at local agencies to be more involved. A lot of times they do this and they just do it, with the resources they have. But once the disaster is declared, they actually, if they get set up to do it, they can actually, just like counties, be reimbursed for the use of their equipment and staff time. If it's overtime, outside of normal hours. A handful of agencies do that, but not every agency does that, and that's something we're going to be looking at developing over the next couple of years, is how agencies know how to get into that pipeline.
Access that money.
Yeah, and access that money, because...
How do they determine how much you get? Is it based on the disaster, or...?
It's typically, I know, like on the initial response, if you have crews that could go out and help clear roads and things like that, a lot of times that's what they need to do.
I guess.
They can do that, and then it's just reimbursed by the hour. Sure. They have set rates from all of that from FEMA that you can then recover that if you're set up to do that initially.
That's good to know. I never knew that triggered something for y'all to get additional money. That's good to know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. And our final question, Representative Tackett Lafferty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I just have a comment.
Okay.
I wanted to thank you today for your presentation. At one time during one of our disasters, our FEMA location was actually located at our CAP location, and that was actually the most convenient situation that I could have imagined. I thought it was brilliant, actually, because when people came in to file their FEMA applications, while of course we like that they're able to go places that are closer to home during a time like that, when they came into that location, they were able to, you do have a presence in the community, and folks are happy to bring their donations because they know the good work that you do with community outreach. And so I was seeing folks coming in to file their FEMA applications, and then CAP was able to point them in the direction of something similar to what the previous presentation was about. response, recovery. You know, really, it was kind of a one-stop shop, and I was really surprised. I've seen it set up several times in different ways, where you have to run to FEMA in one location, and if you need help in another location, you have to travel to another location to get other help with regard to the same disaster. And I just really want to kind of put that brag out there that it really seemed to be a great way to respond to disaster in my community during that time. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. All right, well, that will conclude the task force meeting for today. Our next meeting will be on, scheduled to be on August the 20th at 11 a.m. And our great co-chair Webb will be hosting that meeting, or chairing that meeting, not hosting. You can tell I do a radio show. All right. All right. So that will conclude the meeting.